Hello, and welcome to the channel. Look, we all know the age-old adage, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But what about the places in the world where, well, Americans just aren't welcome? Today we're taking a deep dive into the top 10 countries where your good old US passport won't do you any favors in 2024 and 2025. Think of it this way. This isn't your average top 10 travel destinations listicle. This is more like top 10 places where Uncle Sam forgot to send a fruit basket and now they're not returning our calls. We're talking geopolitical frosty receptions, safety concerns that would make your travel insurance agent spontaneously combust, and of course ongoing conflicts that make a trip to your in-laws feel like a walk in the park. So buckle up, grab your metaphorical passports, because you won't be needing your real one for these destinations, and let's embark on this journey of places you definitely can't go right now, even if you really want to. Alright, let's kick things off with what is arguably the least surprising entry on our list, North Korea. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as it's officially known, isn't exactly known for rolling out the welcome mat for, well, anyone. But Americans? Let's just say they're about as welcome as a vegan at a BBQ festival. The reasons for this frosty reception are about as subtle as a missile launch. We're talking about a government that makes your average HOA board meeting look like a rave zero love lost in the diplomatic relations department with the US, and a human rights record that would make even the most jaded dictator blush. And look, I understand some of you might be thinking, but what about that Dennis Rodman guy? He seemed to have a grand old time. And to that, I say, yes, because befriending a dictator is always a solid travel strategy. Seriously though, unless you're a former NBA star with a penchant for questionable diplomacy, I'd suggest admiring this particular corner of the world from afar. But it's not just the politics, folks. It's the practicalities too. Want to call home from Pyongyang and tell your mom about the, lovely architecture? Good luck with that internet access. As rare as a self-deprecating politician. And don't even get me started on the food. Let's just say you'll be dreaming of a Big Mac faster than you can say juche ideology. Bottom line, North Korea is best left to the history books, documentaries, and maybe, just maybe, Dennis Rodman. Next up on our Where Not to Wear Your I Heart USA t-shirt world tour is Syria. Now, Syria was once home to some of the world's most breathtaking ancient ruins and vibrant cultures. Sadly, today it's synonymous with a brutal civil war that's been raging for over a decade. We're talking a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, with countless lives lost and millions displaced. The US State Department, in what can only be described as a massive understatement, advises against all travel to Syria. And honestly, when the State Department tells you not to go somewhere, it's probably best to listen. It's like when your doctor tells you to lay off the deep-fried Oreos. They're not doing it to crush your dreams. They're doing it for your own good. The risks here are as plentiful as they are severe. Kidnappings, bombings, getting caught in the crossfire of a war you had no part in starting. It's all a bit too real, wouldn't you say? And while it's understandable to want to witness history in the making, this isn't the kind of history you want to experience firsthand. Trust me on this one. But it's not just the obvious dangers. It's also the lack of basic infrastructure. Hospitals are overwhelmed, communication networks are spotty at best, and finding a decent cup of coffee is probably the least of your worries. So, unless you're a seasoned war correspondent with a death wish and a really good insurance plan, maybe stick to exploring ancient Palmyra through the safety of your screen. Syria is a country in desperate need of peace, not tourists. Let's hope for a future where it can once again welcome visitors with open arms, but until then, let's respect its boundaries and focus on providing aid and support from afar. From the deserts of Syria, we now travel to the largest country on Earth, Russia. Now I know what you're thinking, Russia? But they have those adorable nesting dolls and vodka that could strip paint. And you'd be right, they do. But they also have a slight case of geopolitical tension with the US that makes the Cold War look like a friendly snowball fight. Since the whole, invasion of Ukraine thing, relations between the US and Russia have gone from it's complicated to we're breaking up on Facebook and blocking your number. Travel advisories are flashing redder than a Moscow parade, and for good reason. We're not just talking about the potential for getting caught in diplomatic crosshairs. There's also the small matter of arbitrary detention. That's right, folks. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could land you in a situation straight out of a John le Carré novel. Except the ending probably won't involve a suave spy rescuing you. Add to that the crackdown on free speech, the targeting of journalists and activists, and a general atmosphere of paranoia, and you've got yourself a recipe for a vacation that's less Dr. Zhivago and more locked in a gulag. Now, I know some of you adventurous souls might be tempted to book a one-way ticket to Moscow anyway, but before you do, ask yourself this. Is seeing St. Basil's Cathedral really worth risking years of your life in a Russian prison? I'm gonna go ahead and say probably not. Chapter 4, Iran, a Persian Puzzle. Hold on to your hats, folks, because we're heading to a land of ancient history, stunning architecture, and a political climate that's more complicated than a Rubik's Cube designed by Machiavelli, Iran. Let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say Persian leopard in the bazaar. US-Iran relations. They haven't exactly been smooth sailing since, well, let's just say a certain revolution in 1979. And while there have been attempts at thawing the ice, things are still pretty frosty. For American travelers, this means navigating a minefield of visa restrictions, heightened scrutiny, and the ever-present possibility of being used as a pawn in a geopolitical chess match. Not exactly the ingredients for a relaxing getaway, is it? But it's not just the politics that make Iran a no-go zone. The US government also cites the risk of arbitrary detention, particularly for dual nationals. Apparently, having an American passport in Iran is like bringing a tuna sandwich to a vegan picnic. It's just going to cause a scene. Now, I know what you're thinking, but John, Iran has beautiful mosques, delicious food, and the friendliest people. And you know what? You're absolutely right. It's a shame that political realities often overshadow the warmth and hospitality of a nation. But hey, at least we can still appreciate the beauty of Persian rugs and the poetry of Rumi from afar, right? Chapter 5, Yemen, a Humanitarian Catastrophe. Next up on our itinerary of places you really shouldn't visit, Yemen. Imagine a country ravaged by civil war, a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable proportions, and a backdrop of stunning landscapes that are tragically off-limits. That's Yemen in a nutshell. This Arabian Peninsula nation has been embroiled in a brutal conflict that's been called the world's worst humanitarian disaster. We're talking widespread famine, outbreaks of deadly diseases, and a level of destruction that's hard to comprehend. The US government, in what can only be described as a no-dough moment, strongly advises against all travel to Yemen. And frankly, if you're even considering it, you might want to check yourself into a clinic specializing in common sense, because you appear to be fresh out. We're talking about a country where airstrikes, kidnappings, and armed conflict are as commonplace as Starbucks in Seattle. It's not exactly the ideal setting for sipping mocktails on the beach, is it? The bottom line is this: Yemen is facing a catastrophic situation, and the last thing it needs is tourists wandering around oblivious to the very real dangers. So, let's show some respect, offer our support from afar, and hope for a day when Yemen can once again welcome visitors to its ancient cities and breathtaking landscapes. Chapter 6, Libya, Navigating the Chaos. From the tragic shores of Yemen, we journey to another nation grappling with instability and conflict, Libya. Once a beacon of relative prosperity in North Africa, Libya has been mired in chaos since the 2011 uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi. The problem is, getting rid of a dictator is a bit like trying to get rid of a particularly stubborn stain on your favorite shirt. It's messy, complicated, and rarely goes according to plan. In Libya's case, it's led to a fractured nation with rival governments, militias vying for power, and a whole lot of uncertainty. For American travelers, this means a big, fat "do not enter" sign is plastered over the entire country. The US State Department warns of the high risk of kidnapping, terrorism, and getting caught in the crossfire of armed groups who probably aren't too keen on foreigners. And let's not forget the logistical nightmare that is traveling in a country with a shattered infrastructure. We're talking about limited access to healthcare, unreliable communication networks, and the constant threat of violence. Not exactly the makings of a relaxing vacation, is it? So, unless you're a seasoned conflict zone journalist with a hankering for danger and a surplus of Kevlar vests, I'd suggest giving Libya a wide berth. The risks far outweigh any potential rewards, and frankly, there are plenty of other stunning destinations where you can actually, relax and enjoy yourself. Okay folks, buckle up because we're heading to a country that's been making headlines for all the wrong reasons, Afghanistan. After 2 decades of US involvement, the Taliban's swift takeover in 2021 sent shockwaves around the world. And while the scenes of chaos at Kabul airport have faded from our screens, the situation on the ground remains complex and dangerous. The Taliban's return has ushered in a new era of uncertainty, particularly for women and girls who are facing severe restrictions on their freedoms. The US government, in what can only be described as a well-duh moment, has issued its highest level of travel advisory for Afghanistan: do not travel. And it's not hard to see why. The security situation is volatile, to say the least, with the threat of terrorism, violence, and arbitrary detention looming large. Add to that a humanitarian crisis, a collapsed economy, and a government that's not exactly known for its human rights record, and you've got yourself a recipe for disaster. Now, I know there are those who might romanticize the idea of visiting Afghanistan, of witnessing history in the making. But let's be real, folks, this isn't a Hollywood movie. This is a country grappling with immense challenges, and the last thing it needs is tourists stumbling around, oblivious to the very real dangers. So, let's respect the boundaries, offer our support to the Afghan people from afar, and hope for a day when Afghanistan can once again be a place of peace, stability, and open to the world. Our next stop on this whirlwind tour of places you really shouldn't book a flight to takes us to the Horn of Africa, Somalia. Now, Somalia has a rich history, stunning coastlines, and a culture that's as resilient as it is vibrant. Unfortunately, it also has the unfortunate distinction of being synonymous with piracy, famine, and seemingly endless conflict. For over 3 decades, Somalia has been ravaged by civil war, terrorism, and a political system that's about as stable as a Jenga tower built on a roller coaster. The militant group Al-Shabaab, with its charming habit of launching deadly attacks, controls large swaths of the country, making it a no-go zone for anyone with a lick of common sense. The US government, in what can only be described as the understatement of the century, strongly advises against all travel to Somalia. And frankly, if you need the government to tell you that going to a place where pirates and terrorists roam free is a bad idea, then you're probably beyond help. But it's not just the obvious threats, it's the lack of basic infrastructure, the limited access to healthcare, and the constant risk of getting caught in the crossfire of a conflict that shows no signs of abating. It's a country where even the most seasoned aid workers and journalists tread carefully, and for good reason. So, unless you're a pirate-fighting, famine-solving, Al-Shabaab negotiating superhero with a death wish, I'd suggest admiring Somalia's beauty from afar. Let's hope for a day when peace and stability return to this troubled nation. But until then, let's respect its boundaries and focus on providing support from a safe distance. From the troubled Horn of Africa, we journey to a land of breathtaking natural beauty, oil riches, and a political crisis that's left its economy in tatters: Venezuela. Once a popular tourist destination known for its Caribbean beaches, towering Angel Falls, and vibrant cities, Venezuela has been grappling with a perfect storm of hyperinflation, food shortages, and political instability. The US government, in what can only be described as a seriously, don't even think about it moment, has issued a level 4 travel advisory for Venezuela: do not travel. And for once, they're not exaggerating. We're talking about a country where basic necessities like food and medicine are scarce, crime rates are through the roof, and the political climate is more volatile than a Molotov cocktail at a protest. Not exactly the ideal setting for sipping cocktails on the beach, is it? Now I know what you're thinking, but John, Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. Surely they must have some nice resorts tucked away somewhere. And you know what? You're probably right. But getting to them is the problem. With rampant crime, crumbling infrastructure, and a government that's not exactly fond of Americans, you're more likely to end up in a Venezuelan prison than a 5-star resort. So, unless you're a seasoned crisis negotiator with a black belt in bartering and a stomach of steel, I'd suggest admiring Angel Falls from the comfort of your own home. Let's hope for a day when Venezuela can reclaim its former glory. But until then, let's respect its boundaries and offer our support from afar. And finally, we arrive at our last stop on this Where Not to Wear Your Eye voted sticker tour: Belarus. Nestled in Eastern Europe, Belarus has often been dubbed Europe's last dictatorship, and for good reason. Under the iron-fisted rule of Alexander Lukashenko, who makes Putin look like a cuddly teddy bear, Belarus has become synonymous with human rights abuses, rigged elections, and a government that's about as transparent as a concrete wall. Now you might be thinking, Belarus? Never heard of it. What's so bad about a little-known country in Eastern Europe? Well, for starters, there's the whole crackdown on dissent thing. Think journalists being thrown in jail for the crime of reporting the news, peaceful protesters being met with brutal force, and elections that make a mockery of democracy. The US government, in its infinite wisdom, has slapped a level 4 travel advisory on Belarus do not travel. And frankly, if you're the kind of person who enjoys being arbitrarily detained, interrogated by the KGB's Belarusian equivalent, and stripped of your basic human rights, then by all means, book that ticket to Minsk. For the rest of us sane folk, maybe stick to watching documentaries about authoritarian regimes from the comfort of our couches. But it's not just the oppressive political climate that makes Belarus a no-go zone. There's also the small matter of being uncomfortably close to Russia, which, as we've already established, is not exactly a beacon of stability these days. In fact, Belarus has become a staging ground for Russian troops in their war against Ukraine, so there's that little geopolitical time bomb ticking away. So, unless you're a human rights lawyer with a death wish or a die-hard fan of authoritarian regimes, I'd suggest giving Belarus a wide berth. There are plenty of other fascinating and far safer destinations in Europe to explore. And there you have it, folks. Our whirlwind tour of 10 countries where your American passport won't do you any favors in 2024 and 2025. Look, I know it's a bit of a bummer to have your travel dreams dashed against the rocks of geopolitical reality, but hey, at least you're not languishing in a foreign prison, right? So the next time you're feeling adventurous and start browsing flights to, say, Pyongyang or Damascus, maybe do yourself, and the US State Department, a favor and reconsider. The world is full of incredible places to explore that won't land you in a hostage situation or worse. Remember, responsible travel is about more than just ticking off destinations on a bucket list. It's about being informed, respecting the complexities of our world, and maybe, just maybe, not getting arrested in a foreign country. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to renew my subscription to Lonely Planet, the Safe for Democracy edition. Thanks for watching. If you're planning to travel, make sure to check the latest advisories and consider safer alternatives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more travel updates and tips.